Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Viola noticed with horror that she was being led down the corridor of a prison for men. The girl turned to the guards to ask why she was there. However, the men rudely cut her off and ordered her to be silent. Soon, the guards escorted the girl to one of the cells, opened the door, and commanded her to step inside. One of the escorts turned to the inmates and said, "Well, you hardened prisoners, welcome this beautiful lady. The prosecutor ordered that you've got a treat today." After the guards left, Viola looked fearfully at the prisoners. One of the detainees smirked, rubbing his hands together, and said, "Let's all say a big thank you to the prosecutor. Today, we'll have some fun. We just need to draw lots to determine the order. Ease up, boys, and don't rush ahead, fellas. First, we need to find out why this young lady was sent to us." "We'll act according to our own judgment," said a gray-haired man with a weary face. Then he turned to the girl. "Well, my dear, tell us. Who did you cross paths with to end up as a guest among hardened prisoners?" "I don't know. Please, don't do anything to me." "I haven't done anything to you," Viola was pleading. "Don't be so quick to play the innocent here, even if you're a representative of the weaker sex. Women like you don't end up here for no reason. The prosecutor must have been angry with you to send you our way." "Come to me and sit down," said the gray-haired man. Viola glanced at the convicts again. She could see the lustful looks they were casting upon her. She understood what they wanted to do. She looked at the gray-haired man, the one who had spoken to her last, and her female intuition told her that he was in charge here and could protect her. Viola approached the detainee and sat down next to him. Unexpectedly, tears streamed down her face. The elderly man, known as Sergio, patted her hand gently and calmly said, "No need to cry. Calm down and tell us, why did you end up here?" And the young woman suddenly felt the urge to share everything about herself. She didn't even know why she felt that way. Viola covered her face with her hands and slowly began her narrative. Viola was born into an ordinary family. Her mother, Olia, worked as a seamstress at a garment factory, and her father, Roberto, was a mechanic at a plant. At this point, an inmate named Giorgio interrupted her. "Why are you telling us fairy tales? Sergio told you to speak about what you did to end up here, and you're wasting our time. Don't rush, Giorgio. Let her start from the beginning. After all, we've got plenty of time," said Sergio. Viola looked gratefully at the gray-haired man who had stood up for her. She nodded in appreciation and continued her story. Viola considered her childhood carefree until a certain moment, specifically until she turned 12. At that time, her father died. He was crossing the road when he was hit by a car driven by a drunk driver. From that moment, the girl's life turned upside down. Her mother started consuming alcoholic drinks. Olia believed that drinking helped her cope with the grief of losing her husband. She paid little attention to her daughter, who suffered from her mother's behavior. Viola witnessed how her mom would always be drunk by the evening. She endured this situation for about 6 months, trying to talk to her mother, but Olia would promise to quit drinking, only to break her promises every time. Eventually, Viola decided to call her grandmother, who lived in another city, and complain about the situation. The girl fully explained the situation that was happening in their family. The elderly woman, Laura, listened to her granddaughter and promised to come. Grandma arrived a few days later. She scolded her daughter, promising that if Olia continued living like that, she would lose Viola forever. Only this circumstance influenced Olia, and the woman, summoning all her willpower, overcame her addiction to alcohol. Viola breathed a sigh of relief. She thought that was a terrible period in their lives, and now everything would be fine with her and her mom. Life went on as usual. A year passed since the funeral of the head of the family. Viola excelled in school and delighted her mother with good grades. The girl hoped that things would remain like that forever. However, soon Viola noticed that her mother started frequently staying late at work. The daughter asked her, Why do you stay late so often? I noticed it's been continuing for a month now how you come home late. You're so attentive. Well, you help me with the household chores, so you don't need to worry about me, her mother replied. But that's not an answer to my question. All right. It was time to talk honestly. You're not a little girl anymore, and you understand that I'm not old yet, and as a woman, I want to be happy. You're being cryptic. I don't understand what you're trying to say. My dear girl, I have met someone, and we're dating and planning to get married. I wanted to tell you about it for a long time, but you weren't ready for this news. I want to introduce you to him this weekend. It doesn't mean he'll replace your father, but I believe you two will get along. Santiago is a very nice man. Why did you keep this from me for so long? Well, we should meet your beloved then. After some time, they met. Viola wasn't particularly thrilled about the prospect of a new person to appear in their two-bedroom apartment. However, she understood that her mom couldn't live just for her all the time. Viola often discussed this with her grandmother on the phone. Soon, Santiago moved into their apartment and married Olia. However, as soon as the man started living with them, he began to set his own rules. Viola didn't like it at all, but she didn't want to argue. The girl tried to contact with her stepfather as rare as it was possible. She enjoyed the times when Santiago went away for his 3 months due to his job, and she and her mom were left alone. Life continued to flow gradually. Then the summer came. As always during this time, Viola went to live with her grandmother. She enjoyed her summer vacation and returned home with joy. To her delight, she discovered that her stepfather had recently gone away for another work shift. Viola happily thought that she wouldn't see her mom's partner for some time. When her mother saw her after the vacation, she exclaimed with enthusiasm, "You've become so beautiful this summer. Just like a bride. Your grandmother must have pampered you." "Don't exaggerate, Mom. It's just that time goes by, and I'm growing up. After all, I'm already 15 years old." "You're right, time flies." 3 months passed, and Santiago returned home after his work shift. He saw his stepdaughter and enthusiastically noticed that Viola had turned into a ripe berry. He even clicked his tongue in approval. The girl didn't like it, but she didn't say anything to her stepfather. A week after Santiago returned from his work shift, Viola often noticed him trying to be alone with her and occasionally attempting to embrace her in a seemingly casual manner. In those moments, the girl found plausible reasons to avoid interacting with her mother's husband. One day, Viola was at home, playing on her laptop. Her mother was at work, and Santiago had gone out somewhere. Viola was pleased, thinking, "I hope Santiago won't be home for as long as possible." But to her disappointment, he returned home and he wasn't alone. Viola heard a stranger's voice and curiously peeked into the hallway to see who had come to their house. She saw Santiago and an unfamiliar man in the hall. The guest, upon seeing the girl, exclaimed admirably, "Your stepdaughter is gorgeous. It would be a sin not to try and court her." The girl greeted the man politely and hurriedly went to her room. At that moment, Viola wondered why her stepfather had brought his friend home. This had never happened before. But she forced herself to dismiss these thoughts and continued playing. Sometime later, Viola went to the living room to watch TV. There she overheard a conversation between Santiago and his friend. She immediately found out by their voices they were drunk. She grimaced in disgust and thought, "I hope Santiago won't start drinking." Just as she was about to turn on the TV, they started to speak louder, and she overheard her stepfather saying, "I'll win her over anyway. Viola will be mine. I'll buy her a few trinkets, and then it's a done deal. I'll get her into my bed. You have no idea how she blossomed in the 6 months I haven't seen her. Like they say in fairy tales, she turned from an ugly duckling to a beautiful swan. I look at her every day, and it makes my mouth water. And what if your wife finds out about this? What do you want, trying to have intimate relationships with your stepdaughter?" The guest replied, "It's nothing to worry about. My wife loves me too much, and she will have to accept this truth. And I will live like a sultan. I will have 2 wives, one to cook, clean, and take care of household chores, while the young one will please me at night, he said. Viola grew tired of listening to the conversation between the 2 drunken men, especially with such disgusting content. She quickly gathered her things and decided to wait for her mother in the park outside. She left without telling her stepfather and rushed out of the apartment. She settled on a bench in the park, contemplating how to tell her mother about it. After some thought, Viola decided to be honest and share the whole conversation exactly as it happened. A little later, she spotted her mother approaching with a bag. Viola ran up to Olia, took the bag, and her mother looked surprised and said, "Are you deliberately waiting for me to come home from work?" "Yes, Mom. There's something I need to tell you." Uncle Santiago and his friend were drinking alcohol, and they were talking about me, Viola quickly blurted out, and then she narrated the entire conversation between her stepfather and his friend. Olia looked at her daughter with disbelief, but firmly stated that she didn't believe it. Viola was surprised by her mother's response and asked, "Don't you believe your own daughter?" "Let's get home, and I'll talk to Santiago about it," Olia replied. When they reached home, Olia tried to talk to her husband, but Santiago was already snoring on the couch, and his friend wasn't at home. Disappointed, the apartment's owner glanced at the messy kitchen, shook her head, and started cleaning up. The next morning, Olia immediately talked to her husband and told him what their daughter had informed her. Santiago promptly denied everything and claimed that Viola had made it all up. He embraced his wife and asked her to forget about the nonsense their daughter told them, suggesting that she should have ignored the conversation or pretended it never happened. A week passed after the incident. Viola returned home from school, and her mother was at work, while Santiago sat on the couch in a drunken state, watching television. As soon as Viola entered her room, Santiago followed her. He approached the girl, hugged her from behind, turned her around, and started passionately kissing her face. Viola pushed him away with disgust, but Santiago paid no attention and tried to embrace her again, saying, "I'll buy you anything you want, just give me some love. There's no need to tell your mother about this. You don't yet know how I can pleasure you. Later, you'll want to be with me all the time." The girl forcefully pushed her stepfather and hastily left the apartment. She ran to the park and sat on a bench, sobbing. She couldn't imagine living under the same roof with her mother's husband, who was harassing her. Viola desperately wished for Santiago to leave for work and never come back. She knew that her stepfather would continue to pursue her. After a while, she saw her mother coming home from work. Viola rushed to her mother, and Olia noticed that her daughter had been crying. Concerned, she asked, "What happened?" Viola, trying to hold back her tears, recounted the incident with her stepfather. Olia listened sternly and then decisively went inside the apartment. She asked her husband firmly to explain. Santiago smirked and said, "You believe your daughter instead of me. But I can get it. I know I'm in the second place for you. Viola made it all up, and I can even tell you why. You know very well that she's been asking for money for a new phone, and we haven't bought it for her. So, she asked me for money, and I refused. That's why your daughter decided to get back at me by claiming that I'm harassing her." Olia looked at Viola, who was bewilderedly staring at her stepfather. The girl never expected Santiago to lie so shamelessly. Viola told her mother that he was currently deceiving her and saying things that never happened. Olia didn't know whom to believe. She looked at her husband, who seemed completely calm, and then at her daughter, who was silently crying. Seeing her mother doubting her words, Viola abruptly rushed out of the apartment and went to the park again. For a long time, Viola wandered the streets. Her mother kept calling her, but she didn't answer. At the moment, Viola only wanted one thing, to calm down and gather her thoughts. She realized that she would have to return home eventually. She couldn't live on the streets. Viola came back only at midnight. As soon as she entered the apartment, her mother swooped in and slapped her, saying, "I'm worrying about you, and you can't even pick up the phone. Do you think you're all grown up now? And why did you run away? I can only interpret this as you lying about the harassment. Now go take a shower and go to bed. It seems like you have too much freedom." The girl hardly slept that night. She was hurt that her mother didn't believe her own daughter. And Viola knew that her stepfather would definitely harass her again, and she was right. 2 days later, he was waiting for her after school in a sober state and spoke to her. "Listen, why are you acting like a little girl? You see that I'm attracted to you. Just understand that I'll get what I want anyway. I want this desire to be mutual, but you're pursuing something else entirely. Namely, that one day I'll be drunk and take you without your consent. You understand perfectly well what I'm talking about. I don't like you. You have my mom. Why are you bothering me? And I can go to the police, by the way. Don't scare me with that. Your own mother doesn't believe you, and you think the police will?" The man said and tried to hug the girl. At that moment, Viola pushed her stepfather away and rushed out of the apartment. She was frightened by the man's words and realized that Santiago was right in many ways. Most importantly, she knew that this man was capable of doing what he said. Viola walked down the street, biting her lips. She tried to hold back her tears, but at that moment, her grandmother called. When she heard her beloved voice, Viola couldn't hold back and started crying. Laura immediately sensed that something was wrong with her granddaughter. The elderly woman tried to calm the girl down and asked her to tell everything in order. Viola, in despair, revealed the situation with her stepfather. The grandmother understood everything right away and promised to come and take her to live with her in a couple of days. Laura did come 2 days later. She confronted her daughter and son-in-law straight away, saying, "Viola won't stay here. I'm worried about her, and I believe her. But I don't trust Santiago. And you, Olia, should be ashamed that you don't trust your own daughter. Viola wouldn't just lie about something like this, and there's no reason for her to slander anyone. Moreover, Olia, let me tell you that your fiancé is more concerned about keeping his stepdaughter near him than you are. That should make you think about why he needs Viola. But, as I see it, you, my daughter, are completely blinded by thoughts of your fiancé. And he's a man with a rotten soul." Soon after, Laura and Viola left together. The girl was immensely grateful to her grandmother for taking her in. Upon arrival, Laura enrolled Viola in school, and she settled into her new life with pleasure. Though everything here was familiar to her, as she had been coming here for summer vacations, now she no longer feared that her stepfather might come and commit any wrongdoing. This was because before leaving, her grandmother had warned Santiago, "You're living with my daughter, so be it. But remember my words, you don't even need to think of visiting me. I'll chase you away with a broom. Let my daughter keep in touch with us, but you better not stick your nose into our home." Life went on, and Viola soon graduated from high school. During this time, her mother only visited twice, and each time she stayed only briefly. And every time she arrived, she would say, "Santiago has become completely uncontrollable. He often doesn't spend the night at home or shows up drunk, blaming me for everything. I don't even know what happened to him." Viola was always listening silently, feeling sorry for her mother. Meanwhile, Laura scolded her daughter. "I told you that your beloved has a rotten soul, and you should divorce him. You still have time to fix your life. And be careful not to start drinking with him. In that case, you'll be completely lost." Time passed and Viola enrolled in a teacher's college. She had a strong desire to work in an orphanage after her graduation. She had this dream since her childhood when her father passed away. As to why she had such a dream, she didn't know herself. During her second year of studies, Viola met a young man who was 5 years older than her. The encounter happened not far from her home. The young man was visiting his friend when he noticed Viola painting the children's swings in the courtyard while humming softly. He approached her and said in a low voice, "Singing and doing a good deal, that's great. Are you a janitor, by any chance?" Viola flinched in surprise at his words and turned around. She hadn't expected anyone to talk to her. Feeling flustered, she replied that it was simply her own initiative to paint the swings in red so that children would be more inclined to spend time on the playground. The young man, hearing her response, smiled and extended his hand, saying, "My name is Antonio. It seems you have a kind soul if you showed such initiative. Can I help you? It's more fun together." "Thank you, but I can manage on my own. Besides, your clothes are clean, and I wouldn't want you to get painted. I'll be extremely careful. Besides, I see there's just a little left to paint. So, may I know your name?" "Viola." "Nice to meet you." "Well, let's get to work then," the girl said with a smile and handed the brush to the young man. The pair painted the swings, talking with each other. Viola learned from the young man's story that he worked as a carpenter in a joinery. He had never been married, lived with his parents in a 2-bedroom apartment, and enjoyed winter fishing and hockey. Viola also shared her own story in return, telling him about her plans for the future. The two young people finished painting the swings in no time and continued chatting. They didn't realize that time had flown by, and it was already getting dark. Their conversation was interrupted by Viola's grandmother, who was walking home from her friend's place. Laura approached her granddaughter and said with a smile, "I see my granddaughter is standing here, not alone. I thought I'd come over, just in case some bad guy was bothering you." "Grandma, what are you talking about? This young man offered his help and assisted me with painting. By the way, we talked nicely. He's an interesting person. I think you should meet him." "Well, dear granddaughter, I hope you didn't make a mistake about this young man. All right, I'll leave you too. But Viola, don't linger for too long, or I'll start worrying," the elderly woman said and winked at her granddaughter. After a while, young people continued talking, and then Antonio walked Viola to her entrance, where they exchanged phone numbers. Before letting her go, he asked her, "Is there a chance we'll meet again?" "I can't say for sure. It's all up to you. Be original, and maybe we'll meet again." A couple of days passed, and the girl was waiting for her new acquaintance to call, but it didn't happen. Viola was even disappointed about it. And then, her grandmother kept mentioning Antonio from time to time. When her grandmother asked about Antonio once again, Viola responded with irritation. "Maybe we shouldn't talk about that guy anymore? I even regret ever meeting him." "Oh, dear, you seemed to like him at first sight, given how annoyed you answered just now. All right, I won't bring it up again." Viola felt ashamed for snapping at her grandmother, so she rushed to Laura, hugged her, and apologized. At that moment, Antonio called. The girl glanced at the screen, feeling flustered. Seeing who was calling, her grandmother asked if she would answer the call. Laura realized that Viola didn't know how to handle the situation, so she took the phone and answered. "Hello. I suppose this is Antonio? And this is the grandmother of that girl with whom you painted the swings. So, young man, remember that it's not right to disappear like that after meeting someone. And now, I have a piece of advice for you. Take your feet and hurry over to us, or else my granddaughter will walk with another guy." "No need. I'll be there very soon." "Thank you." Soon, the young man and Viola met, and they went for a walk. The girl immediately asked why he had taken so long to get in touch. Antonio apologized for his prolonged absence and explained that his mobile phone was broken and he didn't want to borrow one from others. When Viola heard this excuse, she laughed and asked, "What kind of principles do you have? Is making a single phone call really a crime?" "No, of course not. But after that, I feel obligated to that person. If I invite you over for coffee, will that also make you feel obligated to me?" The girl asked with surprise. "Yes, but I'll be glad for it. Maybe then you'll invite me over so that I'm already committed to you?" The young man joked with laughter. "Oh, you're a sly bug." The girl responded laughing too. Since then, the young couple started dating. At first, they met 2 or 3 times per week, but eventually, they started seeing each other almost every day. After a month, Antonio confessed his love to the girl, and soon they started to have intimate relationships. When Viola finished her second year of college, the young man proposed to her. The girl accepted his proposal because she had genuinely fallen in love with him. However, despite agreeing to formalize their relationship, she asked her chosen one for a delay before getting married. The young man was puzzled by her answer, so he asked, "Why should we wait? We love each other and can live as husband and wife already. Let me graduate first, and we can save up a bit of money. To be honest, with my scholarship, it's challenging to set aside much. So, you'll have to earn for our wedding. I'm not saying I dream of a grand celebration, but I really want to wear a white wedding dress." "Well, all right, as you say. Besides, it won't take so much time for you to graduate." Time passed slowly, and soon Viola graduated from college. She was about to start working when she became concerned. The reason was that Viola hadn't been able to reach her mother for a whole week. It had never happened before. She told her grandmother about it, and the elderly woman advised her, "Why don't you go visit your mother? You can find out how she's doing. Maybe your mother will tell you why she's been so rude to you lately. But Santiago is there. I'm afraid to meet him again. Then I suggest you don't go alone, but with your fiancé. That way, you can introduce the future son-in-law to your mother. And I believe Antonio won't let anything happen to you." "You're right, Grandma. That's what I'll do." A few days later, Viola and her chosen one went to visit her mother. The girl was very anxious about the upcoming meeting with her stepfather. Antonio understood well how anxious his girlfriend was, as he already knew that Santiago was harassing her. The young man tried to support his beloved and assured her that nothing would happen to her with him around. Before long, the young couple rang the doorbell at Viola's mother's place. Santiago opened the door, and he was drunk. He looked at his stepdaughter with a sneer and said mockingly, "Why did you come here? Remembered that you have a mother and decided to show up? Where's Mom? I haven't been able to reach her for over a week because her phone was out of reach. I'm very worried about her." "Why to worry about her? There she is, sitting at the table with a bottle of alcohol. By the way, did you bring some with you? It's not proper to visit empty-handed." Viola didn't respond to her stepfather's last words. She hurriedly entered the apartment and saw her mother sitting at the table, visibly intoxicated. When Olia saw her daughter, she joyfully clapped her hands and rushed to hug her. Viola looked at her mother with surprise as she had changed so much. Before her was a bloated face with a drunken smile. Viola was in shock. She didn't want to entertain the thought that her mother had started drinking again. Nevertheless, Olia embraced her daughter while barely being able to stand on her feet. Viola couldn't bear it and made her mother to sit at the table, then said, "What is it again? You promised not to drink anymore, and here I come, seeing something completely different. My dear, we only had a little today, and tomorrow I'll be as sober as a judge. You'll see. Oh, and who did you bring with you? Maybe you'll introduce me to this young man? By looking at you, no one would guess that you just had some strong drinks today. This is my fiancé, his name is Antonio. But it seems like I won't introduce you to each other today, considering your current state. And also, why is your phone always turned off? I can't reach you, and I'm worried." At that moment, Santiago, who was comfortably sitting on the couch, crossed his legs and interjected into the conversation. He smirked and said quietly, "What phone are you talking about? Your mother sold it a long time ago. So, as a good daughter, you should buy a new mobile phone for your beloved mommy." Viola looked at her stepfather with contempt and didn't bother to reply to him. She turned to her mother and looked at her reproachfully. Viola wanted to say so much to her mother at that moment, but she realized that it wasn't the right time. So, she said to her mother, Antonio and I are leaving now because it's uncomfortable being here when you're in such a state. But I'm sincerely asking you, Mom, to be sober tomorrow when we come back. We need to have a serious talk." With these words, Viola took Antonio by the hand and left the apartment. Only in the stairwell did she let her tears flow. Antonio hugged his beloved and tried to comfort her. Just then, the door of a neighboring apartment opened, and an elderly woman came out. She looked at the couple and said with surprise, "Viola, is that really you? You've become such a beauty. Did you come to visit your mom? I can imagine what you saw there. Katerina, is that you? I'm glad to see you." "Yes, I came to introduce my mom to my fiancé, and then all this happened." "Can you tell me how long she's been drinking?" "About a month, I think. But before that, she didn't rely so much on strong drinks, but once she lost her job, she completely broke bad. But if she's not working, where does she get the money for the alcohol? As far as I know, she do some odd jobs. I tried talking to her, but it's all in vain. Santiago lost his job too, I suppose, as he was supposed to go on rotation 2 weeks ago. But, as you can see, the man is just sitting at home. I understand what you're going through right now, Viola, and I don't even know how to help you." Viola thanked her neighbor and then went with Antonio to a hotel to spend the night there. In the hotel, she called her grandmother and with the tears on her eyes told her everything. The elderly woman tried to comfort her granddaughter, saying that her mother was an adult woman and no words would help if she didn't want to change something in her life. The next day, early in the morning, Viola went to her mother's place with Antonio. This time, luck was on their side. Olia was sober, but she was very angry as she was having a hangover. The apartment's owner didn't try to hide this circumstance, and when she saw her daughter, she said, "Lend me some money. Can't you see how bad I feel? Mom, I won't give you money for alcohol. Let's take you with us. You'll get better, find a job, and everything will be fine for you." "What nonsense are you talking? I'm not going anywhere from Santiago. He is my husband." For a long time, Viola tried to reason with her mother and persuade her to come with them to her grandmother's place. However, Olia stubbornly insisted that everything was fine in her life and right now, she only cared about money. Viola realized that her mother didn't want to listen to her. So, she decided to talk to Santiago, who was sitting in the kitchen. She approached the man and, almost crying, said, "Can't you see that your wife is losing herself? Something needs to be done to change this situation. You married her, and you are responsible for her. You surely understand that Mom's life is going downhill. Let's do something. You are to blame for this. I offered you to be with me, but you ran away to your grandma. What does my leaving have to do with it? Besides, after I left, Mom came to visit me. We often talked on the phone, and everything was great with her. She didn't drink. But suddenly, something happened to her. You noticed it right that it happened about a month ago when she became my drinking buddy. The thing is, I thought you would come back here to live after finishing college. But you found a handsome man. So, I started telling my wife that she pushed you away herself. And, foolishly, Olia fell for it and started keeping me company during our drinking sessions. Let's say it was a little revenge on you for not coming back here." Santiago said maliciously and poured himself a glass of water from the tap, which he quickly drank. During that time, Viola looked at the man with horror. She could never have imagined that her mother's husband could say such things to his wife. Now she understood why her mother had been so cold towards her lately. Viola wanted to say so much to her stepfather, but she only said, "You are such an awful person. Grandma was right, you have a black soul." Soon, Viola left her mother's apartment with her young man. They left the building, and Viola looked back at the windows of her former home. She hoped that her mother would come to the window and try to stop her. But nothing like that happened. Viola felt a sense of bitterness and guilt for what was happening with her mother at that moment. Antonio sensed his beloved had an emotional stress, and he hugged her, saying, Let's go, my love. We'll figure this out together. Don't worry. We will come up with something. There must be a way out of any situation, no matter how bad it seems, and we will find out it together. A month passed since Viola visited her mother and stepfather. During this time, the young woman got a job as a caregiver at an orphanage. Antonio moved in with his beloved, and the couple was preparing for their wedding. During this period, Viola frequently called her mother's neighbor to ask about her well-being. Sometimes, she asked Katerina to call her mother to the phone. However, Viola's conversations with her mother were short. Olia would only ask her daughter for money, and if she received a refusal, she would insult Viola and hang up the phone. Viola was offended by her mother's behavior, but she knew that she couldn't influence her at that moment. So, she made an arrangement with Katerina to send her a small sum of money to buy groceries for Olia. Viola strictly forbade Katerina from giving her mother any cash, as she knew where the money would go. Life went on steadily. Viola worked at the children's home for 2 months. During this time, she bonded with her colleagues and the children in her care. Viola enjoyed interacting with the kids and found it amusing to answer their funny and sometimes tricky questions. She treated children of different ages equally and always made time for each one of them. However, a particular boy, an 8-year-old with blonde hair, caught her attention. He always kept to himself and limped on his right leg. His peers often teased him, giving him an unpleasant nickname, Limping Boy. The boy didn't seem to mind the teasing, he just tried to stay away from the other kids. When Viola witnessed such incidents, she tried to appeal to the conscience of the other children, explaining that it was wrong to call names. Viola became deeply interested in the fate of this boy and approached a colleague to find out how he ended up at the orphanage. The caregiver looked sadly at Viola and said, "I feel sorry for this boy. He's been here for about 4 months. All I can say is that he doesn't have a father, and his mother's parental rights were revoked. Before coming here, his grandmother was raising him and had legal guardianship. But life is a complex thing. Recently, she passed away, and Alejandro, that's the boy's name, ended up here. However, Alejandro won't stay here for long." "Why do you say that?" "Usually, adoptive parents prefer healthy children, and you're saying the opposite. You're right that healthy children are more likely to be adopted. But there are parents who want to help disabled children get back on their feet." The worker of the children's home answered with some embarrassment. After that conversation, Viola began to ponder. She unexpectedly felt a desire to protect this little boy, Alejandro. She couldn't quite understand what attracted her to him in particular. Still, she decided to talk to Alejandro. Viola approached the boy and said, "How about having a conversation? I don't know what to talk to you about. For example, tell me about your grandmother. I know that you loved her very much and miss her. I would be interested to know what you're passionate about and which subjects you like in school. Why do you want to know all this? I'm not sure myself. I can honestly say that I really want to know." The boy looked at her in surprise and involuntarily started telling about himself. Viola was listening with interest and didn't interrupt him even when he stumbled or jumped from one topic to another. The conversation between the woman and the boy lasted for about an hour. Viola learned a lot about the boy's life and never regretted having an open talk with him. After this conversation, Viola started meeting Alejandro frequently and asking him how his day went. The boy enthusiastically told her about new things happening in his life, and in return, Viola tried to bring him some treats every day. The communication between the boy and Viola continued for over a week, and Viola decided to share the story of the boy from the children's home with her partner, Antonio, and her grandmother, Laura. Antonio and Laura attentively listened to Viola's story. When Viola finished speaking, her grandmother said, "It seems to me, dear, that you've grown fond of this little boy. The way you talk about him with such love and tenderness, I feel it too. I think Antonio will agree with me. Now I can say that if you want to make this boy happy, you and Antonio should become his parents." And for that, dear, as you understand, you need to legalize your relationship with your young man. But it's up to you, my dears. I just told you what I think about it." Antonio looked surprised at Laura, then turned his gaze to his beloved. He got up from his chair, clapped his hands with satisfaction, and then spoke softly. "This is a perfect solution. I completely agree with Laura. Viola, your grandmother is a genius. We should have become a family long ago. I understand that marrying means nothing to loving people, but in our case, it is needed for Alejandro to become a member of the family. Now it's up to you, Viola." The girl looked puzzled at her chosen one. Somewhere deep inside her, she had subconsciously been dreaming about it, but she couldn't admit it to herself. And now her loved ones, her grandmother, and Antonio seemed to have read her innermost thoughts and voiced them aloud. With love, she looked at her family and smiled. "I like this idea. So, Antonio, we'll get married in a few days. No need to delay it." The next day, Viola went to work in a cheerful mood. She now knew that she would soon make this little boy, Alejandro, happy. She even wanted to tell Alejandro about it herself, but then she changed her mind. She thought it was necessary to marry Antonio as soon as possible first. Only after that, they could start gathering documents for adoption. Viola was thrilled by the upcoming changes in her life. She wanted to share this with someone and chose her colleague, Marga. Viola sincerely told the caregiver everything. Marga was listening to the girl and didn't hide her opinion and wished her luck. A few days passed, and Viola arrived at work, where Marga approached her and said that the director of the orphanage, Marta, wanted to see her. Viola was surprised and hurriedly went to the head's office, wondering why she was needed there. As soon as she entered the room, Marta gestured for her to sit down and immediately began speaking. "You are new here, and I know that you pay special attention to one of our children, Alejandro. You know perfectly well whom I am talking about. I must tell you that it is not done in children's homes. Other children may feel like they are inferior to this boy because he gets more attention. And I don't need to tell you that it could result in psychological trauma. You are right. I shouldn't have done that. I have been singling out Alejandro among others. But let me explain my actions. I am planning to adopt Alejandro in the very near future. That's why I give him special attention. Can I tell the boy, just like all the other children, that I will soon become Alejandro's mother? It's because of this intention that I've been treating Alejandro differently. Wait. I have also heard about your desire to adopt the boy. But I must disappoint you right away. It won't happen. He already has adoptive parents who will take him away soon. And I can tell you right away that the matter is settled. Therefore, I ask you to minimize your contact with the boy so that it is easier for him to leave the orphanage." "What are you talking about? What adoptive parents does he have? We should be concerned about the child's happiness and hear his opinion. Maybe we should talk to Alejandro first and give him the right to choose with whom he wants to live. I am sure Alejandro would want to live with me rather than with newly found adoptive parents whom I haven't even met yet. Let's speak without emotions. As I said before, this matter is settled. And how can we ask a child with whom he wants to live? It's an absurd. I can assure you that the people who are adopting him are decent and respected. The boy will be well in that family. As for you, I regret to inform you that your adoption request has been declined due to the fact that you are only planning to start a family and have not lived with your husband for some time to prove you're a good couple." Viola looked puzzled at the director. She couldn't find the right words to convince the children's home director to change the decision regarding Alejandro. Marta, who had noticed that Viola was in desperation, said, "Everything will be fine with Alejandro. Trust me on that. We don't just hand children over to anyone. Can I still see Alejandro?" Viola asked. "That will depend on the adoptive parents. But I don't think you should count on it. Adoptive parents usually try to make their child forget about the orphanage." Leaving the director's office, Viola felt disheartened. She understood that she couldn't change the situation. She was ready to do everything in her power to take Alejandro with her. Viola felt like bursting into tears at her helplessness. But her sorrow was interrupted when Alejandro appeared, greeting her with a smile. She patted the boy's head and asked what was new with him. With a sly look, Alejandro replied, "Today, they told me that I will have parents. And you know, I even have a guess about who they might be. Are you going to be my mom?" Viola looked puzzled at the boy. She could see that he was waiting for her approval, but she couldn't give it. Gathering all her strength and trying not to cry, she quietly replied, "No, my little baby, you will be adopted by other foster parents. But don't worry, I just came from the director's office and they told me that your future mom and dad are wonderful people who will love and care for you." "Then why haven't I met them yet? I know you, and we get along so well. But I haven't even seen those foster parents. Let's change everything. I want to live with you." "Alejandro, it's not that simple. There are principles in life that aren't easy to change. And right now, my hands are tied. But believe me, I will visit you." Saying these words, Viola sincerely believed that she would negotiate with Alejandro's adoptive parents, and they would allow her to visit the child. That day, Viola returned home feeling upset. Her grandmother, Laura, immediately noticed her granddaughter's mood. Laura didn't pester Viola with questions but waited for her to share what had happened. After some time, Viola sat down in front of her grandmother and with tears on her eyes told her that Alejandro was being adopted by someone else. Laura tried to comfort Viola, knowing that words wouldn't be enough in this situation, only time could help. After a few more days passed, Viola always tried to keep Alejandro in sight. She hoped she would see the couple who wanted to adopt him. Viola could only think about how to convince those people to let her visit Alejandro. A few more days went by, and one day, when Viola arrived at work, she noticed that her ward wasn't there to greet her. She glanced around, expecting Alejandro to be nearby, as he always was when she arrived. Viola walked through the orphanage halls, peeked into Alejandro's room, and saw that the bed was empty, with only the mattress and no bedding. Viola turned to the other boys and said, "Guys, where is Alejandro?" Viola asked. "Don't you know? His foster father took him yesterday evening," replied the dark-haired boy. "How is it possible? And why did it happen in the evening?" The young woman said, looking at the boys with confusion. She realized that she wouldn't get a sensible answer from the boys, so she hurried to the director's office. Viola entered Marta's office without greeting and immediately said, "What does it mean? Why was Alejandro taken away in the evening without even notifying me? You know perfectly well how I feel about this boy. You didn't even let me say goodbye to him." "I suppose you're asking me to explain myself," Marta said, raising her voice, and continued, "Let me make it clear to you that the new parents have the right to take the child whenever it suits them. I am not obligated to inform my staff about such matters. I understand. But at least give me the address of Alejandro's new family. I want to visit him and talk to his parents. We are not allowed to disclose such information. And now I ask you to leave the office, as I have many things to attend to. As do you, I assume." Viola glared at Marta and left the office without saying a word. She knew the children's home director wouldn't tell her anything, and the other staff members wouldn't provide specific information about the boy. Over a month passed since Alejandro was taken into his new family. During that time, Viola got married to Antonio. They had a modest wedding, and Viola visited her mother hoping they would communicate again. However, it didn't happen. Olia accused her daughter of betraying her by leaving and going to her grandmother's. Viola tried to explain to her mother that it was necessary for her to leave, but Olia simply cut her off and told her to go away. Life didn't stand still, and over 4 months passed since Alejandro had been living with his new parents. Viola often thought about the boy and imagined how well he must have been doing in his new family. She had high hopes and dreams of running into Alejandro on the street and asking him about his life. Her wish came true, but the encounter didn't turn out as she had imagined. One day, Viola went to the other end of the city to do some grocery shopping at one of the markets. She had to go through a fairly large marketplace. She walked, unintentionally glancing at the vegetable stands when she heard a familiar child's voice. Viola turned around and was astonished to see Alejandro, who was plaintively begging for alms. The young woman approached the boy and said with surprise, "What are you doing here? Why are you begging? You have foster parents now, don't you?" Viola said it all in a rush. She was shocked by the sight of the former child from the orphanage. He looked emaciated, with dark circles under his eyes and a bruise on his cheek. Furthermore, she couldn't understand why the boy was asking for alms. Meanwhile, when Alejandro saw Viola, he glared at her and said, "Don't come closer. Go away. You're just as much of a liar. You said I would have a good life, and look at me now." Viola was about to speak to the boy again when a man touched her arm. She looked at the stranger and asked what he wanted. The man gruffly replied, "Really? It's me who should ask why you're bothering my son." Viola looked at the stranger with bewilderment and then shifted her gaze to the boy, who cowered in response to the man's words. She intuitively felt the boy's fear. Viola couldn't understand what was happening at the moment. According to the stranger's words, he was Alejandro's adoptive father. But then why was he immaculately dressed while the boy looked like a little homeless child? Unable to find an explanation for all of this, the young woman said, "If you are Alejandro's father, then you should answer my question. Why is Alejandro begging for alms? What a silly question. Do you think my question is silly? Then let me tell you that it's quite reasonable, considering that I am an employee of the orphanage where Alejandro was raised before he was adopted. So, I am highly interested in why the boy is here, asking for alms." Upon hearing the woman's words, the man seemed initially taken aback, as if he was scared of something. But after a moment, he took Viola's hand and asked her to step aside a little from the boy, stating that the child shouldn't have heard such type of a conversation. Viola agreed and moved a few steps away from Alejandro. Then she heard the man say, "You see, our son grew up in the orphanage before we adopted him, and he used to run away from there and beg for alms frequently. This habit stuck with him, and I'm trying to help him get rid of it. That's why I'm here to take Alejandro home. Don't worry, I'll handle my child myself. It just takes time." But that can't be true. I know Alejandro well, and he would have definitely told me about it. We trusted each other. I want to talk to the boy. Let's not traumatize him. Whenever I catch him doing this, he becomes introverted. You don't want to harm him, do you? By the way, it was your supervisor who told me about Alejandro running away from the orphanage. You can ask Marta about it. Now, excuse me, it's time for us to go home." After saying these words, the man took Alejandro by the hand and walked toward the exit of the market. Viola was standing there, watching them going away. She was puzzled by the man's words. She couldn't believe that Alejandro ran away from the orphanage and begged for alms. Viola decided to find out everything from her supervisor. The next day, when she arrived at work, the young woman went to Marta's office. As soon as she saw Marta, Viola immediately told her about Alejandro and inquired, "Is it true that Alejandro ran away from the orphanage? If so, then it means he did it in the evening, after my workday was over. If that's the case, how could a child at this age go unnoticed from the orphanage? What's the use of having security guards? Yes, Alejandro ran away. And not just him. Don't blame the security guards. You don't yet know what children are capable of when they want something. But don't worry about Alejandro. He ended up in a good family where they will help him, and he will forget about begging." Viola left the director's office feeling irritated because Marta's answers didn't satisfy her at all. Moreover, she was even more troubled by the director's apparent withholding of information regarding Alejandro. Viola tried to inquire about the boy and his escapades from the staff at the orphanage, but there would be no results. Several days passed, but Viola still thought about the boy. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Intuitively, she started spending her weekends visiting different markets. For some reason, she believed that this was where she would find answers to her questions. And indeed, she once again spotted Alejandro begging for alms. Viola looked around and quietly approached the boy. She noticed that the boy recognized her and was about to run away. So, she put her index finger to her lips and gestured for him to follow her behind a vendor's stall. As soon as they were out of sight, Viola said hurriedly, "You have a few minutes to tell me the whole truth. I don't believe that you ran away from the orphanage. Help me understand everything. Tell me now, while your father isn't here. If you want to help me, then please, take me back to the orphanage. Is it really that bad? I was told that you used to run away and beg for alms of your own accord. I know who said that to my adoptive parent. His name is Melesio. I can't talk to you for long. If he notices I'm not where I should be, I'll be in trouble. One more question. How often do you change markets to do this? And how many children does your adoptive father have? We change the place to earn money constantly. This Melesio has another boy and 2 girls. You can learn more from Zoe. She's standing at the market's exit. You'll recognize her by her red hair." After saying this, the boy, limping, ran back to where he had just left. Viola clenched her fists in anger. Now she understood everything. She realized that the adoptive parent was using children to make money. The young woman was furious and wanted to confront this Melesio right away, but then she realized that not only this man might be involved, but also the director of the orphanage. However, these were only speculations without solid evidence. Viola decided to talk to Zoe, whom Alejandro mentioned. She immediately noticed a 13-year-old girl standing at the market's entrance. Just as she was about to approach the teenager, she saw Melesio nearby. Viola hid behind a stall and waited until the man left before approaching the girl. She quickly introduced herself, explained who she was, and asked Zoe to answer some questions. At first, the girl refused, but Viola convinced her and promised to help her escape from the tyrannical adoptive father. Only then Zoe agreed. From the girl's account, Viola learned that Melesio arranges the selection of children into his family under the guidance of the orphanage director. Children with deformities were in high demand, and Zoe showed a scar on her face. After the conversation with the girl, Viola wanted to go straight to the police, but she realized she had no evidence to accuse Marta and Melesio. She also understood that Zoe, Alejandro, and other children would refuse to give testimonies due to fear of their adoptive father. Viola searched for a way to help these children escape from the monster who made them beg for alms. She returned home feeling upset. Her grandmother met her with a tear-streaked face. Viola looked at Laura in fear and whispered, "What happened?" "Your mother was hit by a car. She was crossing the road not at a designated place in a stunk state. She's in the intensive care unit now." Viola collapsed to the floor in the hallway, feeling powerless. She covered her face with her hands and cried. She thought, why do all the misfortunes happen on the same day? At that moment, her husband lifted her up, hugged her tightly, and said, "The main thing is that your mom is alive, so let go of all the bad thoughts right now. I just calmed your grandmother down, and now I'll have to do the same for you. Thank you, my love. I'll try to stay strong. But there's another problem that needs to be solved." After saying these words, Viola shared the story of the former orphanage residents with her family members. Antonio listened to his wife and suggested that they should first visit Viola's mother and support her. After that, they could figure out how to help the children who fell into the hands of Melesio. Viola fully agreed with her husband's decision. A few days later, the couple was at the hospital where Olio was being treated. By that time, she had been transferred from the intensive care unit to a regular ward. Viola held her mother's hand and encouraged her to stay strong. She sincerely worried about her mother and silently prayed for her recovery. The couple spent a week in the city, and as soon as the doctor informed them that Olio was getting better, they decided it was time to return home. Before leaving, Viola told her mother, "Fate has given you another chance to start your life anew. So make sure not to miss it. Daughter, aren't you angry with me? I've been pushing you away all this time. Mom, you don't understand the meaning of the word mother. You are the only one for me, and there won't be another. I want you to be happy, but not with the man you've been living with all this time. He led you astray, and you went down the wrong path. You know, I now realize that Santiago never loved me. It's painful and shameful to admit it. And it's even more bitter because I didn't believe you when you told me that he was making advances toward you. Forgive me, if you can. Are you saying that you believe me now when I said that this man harassed me?" "Yes," the mother said softly. Tears were streaming down her face. After her mother's words, Viola leaned towards her, gently adjusted her hair, kissed one hand, then the other, and whispered softly, "I'm so glad you believe me now, even after all these years. It meant a lot to me, and I hope you know what you need to do now." "Of course, I know. I need to kick this scoundrel out of my apartment. And, my dear, I promise that I'll never drink alcohol again. Thank you, my love, you've grown up to be a good person." Soon, Viola returned home with her husband. She told her grandmother about the conversation with her mother. Laura listened attentively to her granddaughter, then touched her hand and softly said, "You see, your mother managed to get out of the abyss. Now I'm not worried about her anymore, as she won't stray from the right path." Viola was happy that her relationship with her mother had improved. Now the young woman's only dream was to fulfill her promise and help Alejandro. She talked to her husband about it, reminding him that they had another task to accomplish. Antonio kissed his wife in response and said that they needed to meet the boy again and try to convince him to go to the police. Viola looked at her husband with skepticism and said, "Who will take the little boy's statement before the police? You're talking nonsense." "Perhaps you're right, but there is another way. Alejandro should call the psychological support service and share his problems. Or there's another option. You can file a police report, but you must convince the boy to give a statement, as well as the other adopted children of Melesio. The choice is yours." "I reject the first option immediately. As for the second, I'm dismissing that as well. You don't understand. These children are intimidated. You haven't seen Alejandro's face change when he saw Melesio. It was like a scene of a snake and a rabbit. But I only see these two options. There's a third option, but it's clearly out of the realm of reality. You'd have to convince Melesio or the director of the orphanage to go to the police and confess to their misdeeds sincerely. That's the worst option, really. Fine. I'll go to work first and find out what's what." The next day, Viola went to the orphanage. She decided to talk to the director and find out the address where Alejandro lives with his parents. She thought that if she could keep track of Melesio and the children, she might gather some evidence of child labor exploitation. As Viola climbed the stairs, she overheard a conversation between two people. It was the director of the orphanage and an unfamiliar man. The first sentence from Marta made Viola pause and eavesdrop on their conversation. The director said, "Listen, why don't you choose another girl? You should understand that she just recently came to us, and she's going to be taken by her relatives, not strangers. They have already informed us that they are preparing the necessary documents for guardianship. I don't care about that. We had an agreement that I come here, look at the girls, and take those who I like. That's why I pay you so much money. All right, I see your point. I'll offer you even more money to settle the matter with the relatives. You should understand me too. This 13-year-old girl is a real beauty, and she'll bring me a lot of money by indulging men." As soon as Viola heard this, she felt sick. She had just witnessed Marta trafficking children, and they were currently talking about some young girl. Without thinking about the consequences, Viola rushed over to them and blurted out, So, this is what's happening here. It's genuine trafficking, as if an auction is missing with a hammer. Marta, you will hand the girl over to her relatives. From now on, I won't allow you to dispose of the fate of children at your discretion. And now give me Melessio's address, the one who adopted Alejandro. If you don't do that, believe me, I will go straight to the police and write a report about what you're doing. The stranger looked at Viola with surprise, then turned his gaze to Marta, who, in turn, looked mockingly at her subordinate. The man smirked and said that the ladies should have discussed it themselves and then walked away. Viola glared angrily at the orphanage director and demanded Alejandro's address again. Marta smiled sarcastically and said quietly, "Well, go to the police, file a report. But your words mean nothing. What's the evidence? It seems like you're out of your mind if you imagine child trafficking everywhere. And one more thing, you don't work here anymore. Don't bother asking why I'm firing you. You simply can't handle your responsibilities, and believe me, I'll have plenty of witnesses to attest to that. My advice to you, write your own resignation letter and leave. And don't try to be a Robin Hood. And one more thing, forget about Alejandro, or you'll only make things worse for him, and he'll end up in a psychiatric hospital." "Fine, I'll write my own resignation letter, but you won't be working here either," Viola retorted, looking at her interlocutor with fury, and hurried down the stairs. On her way, she met one of the caretakers. She turned to them and said, "You, like everyone else who works here, know what Marta is doing, and yet you all keep silent. How can you treat children this way? They already had a lot of difficulties in their lives." "What are you talking about, Viola? Don't pretend to be so innocent. You, like everyone else, know that the director of this place sells children to wealthy people with just a snap of her fingers, and you all just turn a blind eye to it. The one thing I can't understand is how you can sleep peacefully at night without these children haunting your dreams. If you have nothing to say, then too bad. Maybe you can at least tell me the address of Alejandro Navarro, the one who adopted Alejandro? That's confidential information. You know that as well as I do. Only the director of the orphanage can tell you that." After these words, Viola glared at her colleague with hatred and, saying nothing, quickly left the building. She walked for a while, her face streaming with tears, as she pondered what to do in this situation. Viola understood that going to the police and accusing Marta of a crime without evidence would be foolish. However, she also knew that ignoring this situation was not an option. As she walked, she was interrupted by a young voice asking for alms. Viola abruptly stopped and looked around. She realized that she was at a small market where people sold vegetables. At that moment, Viola saw Zoe, who was begging for alms. Grateful for this encounter, as the girl was the only one who could help her, Viola looked around and then approached Zoe and whispered softly, "I know very well that you remember me. Right now, I won't ask you about everything. Just tell me where you live and where Alejandro is. Alejandro recently ran away. I tried to dissuade him from doing that, but he said he'd be better off living in the orphanage rather than with that family. I tried to explain to him that either way, he'll be sent back to Melesio, and I also told him that Marta is in cahoots with our so-called foster father. But he didn't believe me. Alejandro is in big trouble now. We've had cases like this before. Thank you for that, you really helped me. Take care, and I'll try to do something and get you out of this mess. I'll be honest, I don't know how yet, but I'll find a way." Viola realized that she now needed to take Alejandro from the orphanage and help the other children who were with Melesio. At that moment, she only wanted one thing: to protect the boy from all harm. She was sure that the boy was in the orphanage, so she headed there. When she approached the orphanage, she was surprised to hear from the guard, "You are not allowed to be here. You don't work here anymore. You'll get your employment record tomorrow. But I need to talk to the director. I have the right to do that, don't I?" "Unfortunately, you don't. It's an order from the orphanage director. If you don't comply, I'll have to call the authorities because you're a danger to society." "Am I?" I guess that's what your boss told you too. Have you all lost your minds here? Viola stepped away from the main entrance and quietly circled the building. She pondered how she could get inside the orphanage. She glanced at the windows on the first floor, trying to see Alejandro's face there. She even shouted the boy's name several times, hoping he would hear her and let her know he was inside the building. She continued further and soon approached the back entrance. Viola felt unsure about what to do next and, in desperation, picked up a stone to break the glass and thus force her way inside. And then, unexpectedly, she was called by name. Viola turned around and saw a janitor not far from her. Viola approached her, looked puzzled at the janitor, and then the old woman said, "Legends about you are already going around here. I know that you want to help the children. We both understand what I'm talking about. But, dear, it's not that simple. Why did you call me? To tell me that you all know what Marta is doing and yet keep silent? Well, now I know all that. I understand what you're feeling. But it's very difficult to go against the system. You don't realize that you're poking a hornet's nest. Here, you need the support of influential people. And I assume you don't have that? Now, let's focus on how I can personally help you. Tell me how to find Alejandro Navarro. He ran away from his foster parents and went to the orphanage. I know this for sure. I got fired from here today, and they won't let me inside the building, but I must find the boy because I promised not to leave him in trouble. And that's why you decided to break the glass to get inside the building? That's a foolish decision, as you'll get caught, and then the authorities will be involved, and you won't be able to help the boy anymore. Moreover, he's not in this building. Alejandro is in the garage. They keep runaways from foster parents there. They call it a correctional facility. They conduct healthy exercises with the runaways there. What do you mean by healthy exercises? Viola said with horror. But the janitor didn't respond. She just lowered her head. The young woman felt a chill creeping into her soul, and terrifying images flooded her mind. Viola dashed towards that building. At that moment, she only wished for the boy to be safe. As she approached the garage, she heard a distressed cry of a child. Viola wasted no time, opened the door, and rushed inside. And she was stunned by what she saw. Marta was standing there, holding a whip, and near Alejandro was sitting on his knees with his hands tied behind his back. Viola screamed and shouted at the director. "You're not human. You're a dangerous beast. Don't you have your own children? How can you treat kids like this?" After saying those words, she hurried to the boy to free his hands from the rope. However, Marta blocked her way, swinging the whip, and said harshly, "Stop. If you take him out of here now, they'll catch you immediately, and you'll be charged with kidnapping the boy. But that will be just one problem. In your case, Alejandro will suffer even more, as they'll send him to a psychiatric hospital from which he'll never escape. I can prove your guilt, so don't scare me. It's better for you to step aside, or I can't guarantee what I might do," Viola responded confidently. "This child must be punished. He doesn't obey his parents and neglects his duties. If his father told him to do something, he must do it. And this brat not only disobeyed his father, but also ran away from home. Such behavior deserves punishment, and there's no room for mercy here. Please, stop. You can find another business for yourself. Trafficking children is despicable and vile. You will pay for this on Judgment Day. I'm begging you, stop before it's too late." Viola pleaded. "You think you're tough, girl, but you're wrong. Don't scare me with the universe and its divine punishment on the judgmental day. If there was a God, they would have sent me a child in due time, but I don't have and won't have any children. So, because of that, you're taking it out on the children who lost their parents? On the contrary, you have a good solution: adopt or foster a child, or even more, and give them your care and love," Viola shouted with hope, trying to persuade Marta. "I gave up on motherhood long ago, and I don't like children now. I live for myself only, and my goal is to earn enough and then move abroad, where I'll live for my own pleasure. Now it's enough of these sentimental conversations. Get out of my way, because it will still do what I need to." Then Viola realized that Marta was about to strike the boy with the whip. Without hesitation, she rushed to rescue him. With a strong push, she shoved Marta away, and the woman, who wasn't expecting it, flew to the floor. As she fell, she hit her head on a sharp object. Viola didn't witness that, as she was already kneeling beside the boy, untying his hands. Alejandro was crying and unable to say a word. Viola hugged the boy and promised him that everything would be okay. At that moment, the janitor appeared in the garage and noticed Marta lying motionless. The janitor approached the woman, checked her pulse, and then muttered quietly, "What have you done, dear?" Viola looked at the old woman and understood everything without words. She realized that punishment awaited her now. The young woman thought about the other children who were under Melessio's control, waiting for someone to untie him. Viola didn't hesitate for long. The decision came to her instantly. She stood up, helped the boy to his feet, and then turned to the janitor. "Please, I'm begging you, take care of Alejandro. I have another matter to settle." "What are you planning to do?" the elderly woman asked in bewilderment. "I need to see this through. I'm only asking you to call the police after some time. You can tell them everything as it happened. Listen, I don't know what happened here, but you'd better wait for the authorities. Otherwise, in this case, it might seem like you fled the scene of the crime. I can't stay. I promised someone that I'd help." Suddenly, Alejandro joined the conversation, having stopped crying by then. The boy took Viola's hands and whispered softly, "You're not to blame for anything. Marta wanted to attack me, and you protected me. You're like a superhero to me." Viola smiled and ruffled Alejandro's hair, then replied, "Now I need to become a hero one more time to help someone else. And you, listen to this respectable lady. She won't harm you for sure. We'll meet again, I promise. And you know, I keep my word, as you see," said the young woman with a smile, having already made her decision about Melessio. She perfectly understood that she would face punishment, and she didn't care anymore about the length of the sentence she would receive. She wanted to see fewer people like Melessio in the world. And she also remembered her promise to Zoe. When the janitor heard Alejandro's response, she felt unease in her heart. She approached the young woman and looked into her eyes. Viola didn't avert her gaze, and then the janitor said, "I don't know what you're planning, but I don't feel good about it. You're a good person. I'm asking you now, don't act like a fool. It's all right, don't worry. By the way, I don't even know your name." "Anna." Finishing her story for the inmates, Viola fell silent. One of the prisoners complained that he wanted to hear the whole tale to the end. Viola looked at him and said slowly, "If for you, it's a fairy tale, for me, it's a prison sentence. And if I continue the story, it's already too short. Don't drag it out, tell us the story." Another person demanded. "Okay, I'll continue. After I freed Alejandro and handed him over to Anna, I headed straight to Melessio's home. I knew they weren't there because they were out on their so-called business. I expected that man and knew what I would do. I had no doubt that I was doing the wrong thing, as going to the police would have been futile. As Anna explained, there was a certain system there. Soon, Melessio appeared with Zoe and two 7-year-old twin boys. Of course, he recognized me right away. He looked at me with some mockery and ordered me to leave. I asked him to go to the police and confess. Melessio laughed in my face and said that this business had existed and would continue. At that moment, I looked at Zoe. Words cannot express the pain and despair in her eyes. I understood that this girl truly hoped for someone to help them. In short, I asked the children to go out to the courtyard since I was waiting for them in the stairwell. As soon as Zoe and the boys came out, I stabbed Melessio several times with a knife. He didn't expect this from me. He looked at me with surprised eyes and quietly fell on the floor. Soon, I went out to the children and told Zoe to take the boys and go to the orphanage to find Anna. The girl asked me about Uncle Malesio, and I lied, saying that I would now take their place. After that, the children went to the orphanage, and I headed to the nearest police station, where, by the way, they already knew about Marta and, naturally, about me. And then everything turned out to be like in a movie. There was a trial where I honestly told everything I did and how. I revealed about the child trafficking at the orphanage too. But, let's say, they forced me to keep quiet, threatening to frame me with another case accusing innocent people. I had no choice but to remain silent. And then came the verdict and the prison sentence. That's my whole story. A fairy tale for the sentimental ones. I'll start crying crocodile tears right away, Giorgio said sarcastically and continued, but we're not the kids from the orphanage here, we are hardened convicts who don't believe in fairy tales. At that moment, Sergio stood up from his seat and ordered Giorgio to be quiet, then the elderly man said sternly, I knew the second part of this girl's story beforehand. I also knew which prosecutor ordered Viola to be thrown among us for amusement. I was curious to see how truthfully she would tell her story. I must admit that the girl didn't lie about a single word. If she honestly narrated the part about her sentence and why she was imprisoned, then I believe her initial story too. Furthermore, I can add that Viola, without hesitation, stood up for a boy who, essentially, was nobody and meant nothing to her. I must say that to me, her actions are heroic. Yes, she took the life of a monstrous woman who, let's say, trafficked children, as well as a scoundrel who exploited child labor. Another lady like Marta can take her place, just as another accomplice can replace Malesio. But at least this girl taught the workers at the orphanage that it's possible and necessary to fight individuals like Marta and Malesio. That's why I'm standing here before this girl and applauding her. After these words, Sergio and all the inmates stood up and applauded in unison. Viola looked at the convicts and couldn't believe what was happening. She just sat there, silently crying. Meanwhile, Sergio addressed her. Tell me, why did the prosecutor target you like that? I told you from the beginning that I don't know it myself. If I knew, why would I lie to you? I'm also curious about this question. Now I can tell you why the prosecutor gave the order to place you among us. The director of the orphanage was his mistress. They had been seeing each other for a long time. I know their story not just by hearsay. I was still free at that time. Anyway, Marta got pregnant by him at some point. But she couldn't carry the child to term. The prosecutor could have abandoned her and found another woman, but apparently he loved her deeply. Though who knows for sure, as he never left his wife for Marta, he lived with two families, and this went on for quite some time. But fate had a different plan. And I think his beak might also be in the mud. In this child trafficking case, the prosecutor simply wanted to take revenge on you for his beloved and for revealing child trafficking in court. He's probably afraid of his name coming up in the case, but we'll talk about that later. Now, what about the boy? I don't know anything about Alejandro, and I'm really afraid that something might happen to him. Honestly, I don't even know how my mother, husband, or grandmother are doing. It feels like I've been completely cut off from the outside world. Sergio, I want to thank you especially for shedding light on why the prosecutor was angry at me. I was really lost in speculations. Don't worry about that. I knew about your charge beforehand. I have some connections outside. Just don't get discouraged. People here don't particularly appreciate that, replied Sergio. After some time, Viola was transferred to the women's prison. She remembered the days she spent in the men's cell with respect, as none of the inmates insulted or humiliated her after they found out the reason for her imprisonment. She knew it was all thanks to Sergio, who treated her nobly. He gave her a chance to speak up and then stood up in her defense. Viola understood all this and dreamed of somehow repaying him. However, she didn't know that Sergio would help her not only with that. A few months later, Viola had a meeting with her husband, who told her that Alejandro was now in a different orphanage and was living happily. He even sent a letter that said, "Dear Viola, I am very grateful to you for keeping your promise and helping not only me but also other children to escape from the hands of the monsters. I promise you that I will live by the law and never commit acts that I would later be ashamed of. I really dream of seeing you again and talking as we did when you worked at the orphanage. And I'm sure that it will happen soon. Also, just like your husband, I'm getting into fishing too. He visits me often and talks about fishing. If you have a chance, write to me. I will be very happy to receive a message from you and will reply right away. And by the way, Anna sends warm regards to you, as well as Zoe. Don't feel lonely and know that we all remember you. After reading this short letter, Viola burst into tears. She was immensely pleased that these children were now safe and held her in high regard. Besides everything else, she learned from her husband that her mother, after being discharged from the hospital, kicked Santiago out, and Olia found a job and adopted a healthy lifestyle. Recently, she had met a man who proposed to her, and she accepted. Antonio handed Viola a note from her mother, which read, "My dear daughter, hold on. Once you said these words to me when I was in the hospital. Now I'm returning them to you. Know that we are all waiting for you here. And you have the most wonderful husband in the world, who loves you and will never abandon you. I am very happy for both of you. You will hear other news from Antonio. The most important thing is to take care of yourself. Love you. Your mother." After the meeting with her husband, Viola felt like she had wings. She wanted to live and get out of prison as soon as possible. However, she knew it wouldn't happen anytime soon. Sometimes, she caught herself thinking, why should Antonio suffer and wait for so many years while I'm serving my sentence? But at that moment, Viola remembered her husband's words. Before saying goodbye after the meeting, he told her, "Sometimes you may feel like it's a burden for me to wait for you. Well, I want to ask you to get rid of those thoughts because, besides you, I don't need anyone else. And remember, I won't let you leave me, no matter how much you might want it. You just need to believe that you are everything in my life. And I know that together, we can overcome all the hardships of life. I love you very much, my fighter for justice." A couple of months after the meeting, Viola was unexpectedly called to the investigator. As soon as the young woman entered the office of the law enforcement officer, she immediately asked, "Why am I here? I understand that right now it's your only question, but there will be many more later. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Ignacio, and you are here concerning the case of a certain person. Let me start our conversation differently. I will remind you of your crime. You remember perfectly well that you took the lives of 2 people. So, this case of child trafficking was initiated a couple of months ago. We were contacted by the janitor from the orphanage, Anna, and then a couple more witnesses from the same institution appeared. Then the children who begged for alms were interviewed. Wait, why are you reopening this case now when those people have long been deceased?" Viola asked with surprise. "You understand that those people were just pawns in this game. Now we are investigating this case to find out who is behind all of this. I would like you to take a look at 3 people and identify anyone if you can. Are you willing to cooperate with us?" "Yes." Shortly afterward, 3 men stood before Viola. She carefully looked at them, and suddenly, she was struck like an electric shock. She recognized one person who stood in the middle. It was the man who talked to Marta about a girl he wanted to take for the pleasure of other men. Viola firmly pointed to this person and recounted under what circumstances she had seen him. The investigator couldn't help but smile, and the young woman noticed it. A few days passed after the identification. Viola didn't know anything about what was happening. She had many questions she wanted to ask. And soon, she got the opportunity. She was called to the investigator again, and without hesitation, she began to inquire. "Is the person I identified the leader of this gang? Why did you smile then? What awaits this person now? You're so talkative right now. He's not the gang's leader, but he led us to him. And who is that? This person is familiar to you. It's the prosecutor who ordered you to be thrown to the hardened criminals. Soon there will be a trial, and this person will face the law. We are very grateful to you for your cooperation. And a big hello to you from Sergio. Viola froze. She heard it. In that instant, everything became clear to her. She vividly remembered the prosecutor, Marta's lover, and she had learned about him from Sergio. Viola also realized that the silver-haired man from the cell had re-entered her life, and it was his doing that led to the reopening of the case. Viola directly asked the investigator, "Did Sergio organize all of this?" "Exactly. He used his connections and asked to talk to the staff at the orphanage where you worked. That's how we reached the janitor, Anna, who willingly filed a report. And then 2 more caretakers expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After that, the children gave testimonies in the presence of psychologists, stating that they had seen these 2 individuals. And so, the mystery was about to unravel, leading us to the prosecutor. Why is Sergio helping me? What does he want from this? I can't answer that question. Maybe you touched his soul in some way. Sergio is a very complex man, but I know from personal experience that he is just. By the way, he left a message for you. Hello, noble defender of children. I know you're wondering why I helped you. Let me tell you that you have a short memory. After all, I promised you this. Remember, nobody cancels the boomerang in this life. That principle caught up with the prosecutor. I really hope that you will remain the bright person I met in the cell. And I wish you nothing but the best. I won't use jargon since I don't see you as a hardened inmate. I see a wonderful mother and a loving wife in your future. And lastly, don't try to find a way to repay me, or I'll turn from a kind wizard into an awful vampire. Just remember me with kind words from time to time, and that will make me happy. With respect, Sergio." Viola looked at the investigator and was about to cry. He understood the young woman without words and took out a handkerchief from his pocket, which he handed to her. Viola nodded in thanks and wiped her eyes. She remained silent for a few minutes, gathering her thoughts, and then barely audibly asked the law enforcement representative, "Why are you helping him?" "Good question. And do you think I'll answer that?" "I don't think so. I just dared to ask. But one thing I know is that you are a good and honest person." "Thank you. And I have one more question. What is Sergio's last name?" "Sergio Martinez." "Please, if possible, convey my gratitude to Sergio and tell him that I will name my firstborn Sergio," Viola said with a smile. "I will definitely pass on the message." "Good luck to you, Viola." The young woman left the investigator's office with a smile. She walked, thinking about Sergio. About how this man had helped her 3 times in her life without even knowing her. Viola mentally thanked the gray-haired man with the weary face, who understood her as a person. She made a vow to herself never to forget this man and fulfill his request to remember him with kind words. With these thoughts in mind, Viola felt a great sense of relief and realized that she could now face all the difficulties that still could lay ahead in her life.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.